Hello, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on Section 179 expensing. Normally, what happens is when you buy a machine or an equipment for your business, you cannot deduct the whole expense in the same year. Rather, what you do is you use a depreciation method, for example, a straight line depreciation method. Let's think about a business person who buys maybe $10,000 worth of an equipment, and let's pretend that that equipment has 5 years of useful life. And if that person takes a straight line depreciation, then they can deduct $2,000 each year. So what's happening here is that person is not deducting the whole $10,000 in the same year in which they purchased that equipment. Rather, they have to wait 5 years to deduct the full amount. Now, this is where Section 179 becomes really useful because it lets you expense the cost immediately. That is, you can deduct it all in 1 year instead of spreading it out. We have to remember certain numbers, and these will not be provided to you during your CFP exam. The first number is the maximum deduction, and for the tax year 2026, this number is 2.56 million. And that's a number that you will have to memorize because this will not be provided to you during the CFP exam. Again, this is a number that can change over time. So if you are watching this video at a later time, please make sure that you know the latest number. The next thing is threshold amount. That is, what's the value of all the assets that you have put into business in that particular tax year? And that threshold amount for tax year 2026, that's 4,090,000. Again, that's a number that you'll have to memorize because this will not be provided to you during your CFP exam. Now, let's think about one example where the amount of assets that was placed in business is 4.5 million. Now, this 4.5 million is clearly above the threshold amount. Now, let's try to figure out by how much is the amount of assets that we put in our business is above the threshold amount. And if we do the math, we see it's 410,000, $410,000. That's above the threshold. The amount of assets that's above the threshold amount, that amount gets deducted from your maximum deduction. What that means is rather than you taking this 2.56 million of deduction, you will have to take a lower deduction amount, and that's 2.15 million. And the deduction for you decreased because you put assets greater than the threshold amount. So let's go back to our previous example. We had the maximum deduction in the tax year 2026, that's 2.56 million. The threshold amount, we say that's 4,090,000. Now let's think about a business that put 2.56 million worth of assets into their business that is exactly equal to the maximum deduction amount and well below the threshold amount. So far, so good. But let's pretend that their earned income from the business was 1.5 million. In this case, this person will not be able to deduct the maximum 2.56 million. Rather, they will have to deduct equal to their earned income. So that's another thing that we have to remember. So two things that we need to remember from the Section 179 expensing. One is, are we putting assets above the threshold or not? And then what is our earned income? So these two things will determine how much deduction we can take under the Section 179. Now let's look at an example. It says in 2026, Alex placed certain amount of qualifying Section 179 property into service. His taxable income was certain amount. How much can Alex deduct under Section 179 in 2026? The reason that I put some missing places in this question is that we'll work with different numbers and we'll see how much deduction can Alex take under each scenario. So let's look at the first scenario. For tax year 2026, this number is 2.56 million, as we have discussed before. The phase out threshold again for 2026, it's 4,090,000. So these two are going to be same in each scenario. These are not changing within a tax year. And then in first scenario, let's pretend that Alex put 2 million assets in service and Alex's taxable income is 3 million. The first thing we do is we compare assets placed in service, that is 2 million, against the annual limit of 2.56 million. So because assets placed in service 2 million is less than the 2.56 million annual limit, so 2 million might be the correct answer if we are thinking about the deduction in tax year 2026. So that's our step one. We're sticking with 2 million. Now, next we compare this number that we got, that is 2 million, against our taxable income. And we compare whether this number is less than our taxable income or not. And again, 2 million is less than 3 million. So we pass the second test as well. The last test we have is the amount of assets that we placed in service, whether that's above the threshold or not, which clearly is not the case. It's not above the threshold. That means 2 million passes the third test as well. What that means is that Alex can take full 2 million deduction for the tax year 2026. Now let's look at the second scenario. Here, assets placed in service is 4.2 million and taxable income is 6 million. So let's try to look at each test. The first comparison is between annual limit and assets placed in service. And as you can clearly see, assets placed in service is greater than the annual limit. That means annual limit is the one that will pass the test. Next, we are going to compare our annual limit against our taxable income. Our taxable income is much greater than our annual limit, so that's not an issue. So this 2.56 million still survives. Now let's think about the third test. How much did we put in service above the threshold? And we clearly put something above the threshold, so we'll have to subtract this number from this number. And once we do that, we see that our assets placed in service above the threshold is $110,000. What that means is rather than taking this full 2.56 million, Alex now has to take a lower amount than this one, and this amount will be lower by this amount, $110,000. So once we do the math, we see that Alex's deduction under section 179, it's going to be 2.45 million. Now let's look at our third and final scenario. Now everything else essentially remains the same except the taxable income has changed. Rather than this being 6 million, this is now 1.8 million. Now what many students do is that they don't notice the difference between scenario 2 and 3, and they do the same calculation as in scenario 2, and then they select this answer, 2.45 million deduction, as the correct answer. And they do not pay attention to the fact that the taxable income here is 1.8 million. And the deduction you take, it cannot be greater than your taxable income. What that means is 2.45 million in scenario 3 will be the wrong answer. And the correct answer here is going to be 1.8 million, because you cannot deduct more than your taxable income. So here is the summary that you need to remember regarding section 179 expensing. The first is the annual limit. You can deduct up to the annual maximum. For 2026 tax year, that number is 2.56 million. Again, this number can change over time, and this number is not provided to you during your CFP exam. So please make sure you know the latest number. The second thing is this phase out reduction. If total purchases exceed the phase out threshold, again, the threshold for 2026 is 4,090,000. The annual limit is reduced dollar for dollar by the excess amount. Lastly, there is this taxable income limit. The deduction cannot exceed business taxable income. If you can remember these three things, you should be able to get all the questions on section 179 correct on your CFP exam. This brings me to the end of this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.